Greetings, welcome to the latest of my deep dive videos. Today I'm going to explore the arrival of the electric, innovative but provocative energies of Uranus into the air sign of Gemini. The first time for 83 years, it begins for an initial 5-month visit on the 7th of July. What can we broadly expect? But I'm also going to share with you the event chart. So the exact moment that Uranus arrives, the relationship that Uranus is forging with other planetary players, and the houses they are located in gives us a much more penetrating understanding of what we might expect over the next 7 years of Uranus's journey through this sign. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundell. I'm going to tell you which zodiac signs will be particularly influenced by this, both positively and negatively, but I'm also going to then go on to give you a detailed understanding from Aries through to Pisces of what you can expect, which you can relate to in terms of your ascendant, sun or the moon. Thank you so much for joining me. All your views and interactions are truly appreciated. We have found that 50% of people who watch my videos regularly are not subscribers. If that's you, please help the channel to thrive. Click that sub button, but also the bell notification symbol. So this event begins on July the 7th. And when Uranus returns to each sign, it's always for an initial 5-month visit. I'm just going to dip into what happened when Uranus moved into Taurus. We're going back to the middle of May 2018. Now the big picture is that Uranus in Taurus is in its fall, so not a happy combination. The sign of Uranus is very much about continuity, stability. It is to do with foundations. It can be to do with our values and also everyday money. But in the sign of Aries, right on the first degree, was the planet of war, Mars. So when Uranus moved into the sign of Taurus, there was Mars in an abrasive right angle. So you get the electricity of Uranus and sometimes the impatience and impulsiveness, which can also be a feature in some ways, that impulsiveness of Mars. And we've seen a lot of things happen since then, which have been very, very challenging for us all. COVID, we've had the cost of living go up because fuels often extracted from the ground have become more expensive because of conflict in the wider world, and that's also played into the cost of foodstuffs because the sign of Taurus is very much about agriculture. So that initial event chart in the middle of May 2018 provided a backdrop which has been remarkably accurate from that point through to when Uranus returned to Taurus in March 2019, from that point through to now. So when I share the event chart shortly, that's going to give us a much greater understanding of exactly how this might be. But it's important to understand, I think, in astrology that we can have a higher vibration of any zodiac sign, but also a lower one too. The same can be true of planets, and the same can be true of ourselves. We all have the best version of ourselves, and sometimes we don't always show it. So what can we expect of Uranus in Gemini broadly? The sign of Gemini, ruled by Mercury, is about those fast everyday exchanges. So it's an air sign, and it's about communication. Communication works in lots of different ways. It's essentially, because of the air, a very cerebral influence, but Uranus can have a more intuitive dimension to it, because the rule of the sign of Gemini is the messenger of the gods, and Uranus is one of the gods. We're being asked to be more mindful of how we interact with one another, the quality of our message, but also our connections. And our connections with others to a larger extent these days, do seem to take place digitally. But the third house can be to do with our local communities. It can be to do with short journeys. It can be to do with our connection to our siblings. It may also be to do with our ideas, of course. And Uranus, in a way, is pushing us to aspire to a better way of being around those themes. But we have to look at the harsh realities of life. So one of the things that I think may play out with Uranus in Gemini is extra, for example, use of data, and that data, big data, can be used to garner knowledge about everything we do. Now, we know that supermarkets have been observing our behaviour for years. That's why they have these loyalty cards, and then they can tailor their promotions or what they send out to us to meet our individual patterns. So that kind of stuff is going to become much more to do with, I feel, central governmental approach to how they connect with citizens. So it just depends on your viewpoint how that feels. Some people will think that's okay, I've got nothing to hide. Other people will think that's an invasion of privacy. But I think the electronic digital age, which is very embedded, means that the energy of Uranus can be quite relentless really around change. So another thing that could come up that I think could be somewhat challenging, this is my personal viewpoint, is the delivery of goods by drones. Now, great, it sounds very efficient, but if we got drones everywhere, where do we get peace and quiet if our every minute is being in some way invaded by someone seeking our attention, but also the noise of them? Then you get what happens to the van driver who delivers the parcel, or if we have driverless taxis, again, short journeys, very Gemini. We may see greater technology go into things like cycles, motorcycles, so they become more efficient. That could be a very positive thing, but driverless cars, driverless taxis, driverless lorries, it's all coming, isn't it? But that could have an impact on how we connect at a more human level. So the important thing I think to understand is that although the excitement Uranus can bring in Gemini can bring some positivity, especially around the sciences in a constructive way, there is the worry that the physical, intimate connection that we all have and we need, conversation, just chatting, sharing our experiences. Not everything can be done online, or if it is done online, it's not going to be so enriching. Another thing, of course, is AI. So you will see, if you do some searches, that journalists and even media are very concerned about how AI is being used by the big tech companies in order to basically quarry resources, but for free. What happens to those publications, their journalists? They're not receiving a return on their investment and their labour. That's quite concerning, and the sign of Gemini very much to do with journalism. So those things I think are rather concerning, but that's just my personal viewpoint. What I think we can see is a lot more of the connection between citizens in a more localised way, which can be very constructive. Helping each other used to be all the rage, and but things like local markets, taking goods a short distance to sell, and obviously that helps people to connect, meet, share ideas. We could even see some people being open to exchanging goods for labour, but that is likely to be much less prevalent if we're honest. So the rate of change is definitely going to heat up. So which zodiac signs are going to find this initial 5 month visit really exciting? I think it is Gemini, it is Libra and Aquarius, and especially if you have planets in the first 3 degrees. Now, if you're a fire sign, including Sagittarius, with Uranus on the 7th house cusp, also potential for things to start moving very dynamically. I think what can be more challenging, to be honest, is going to be Virgo and Pisces. Because in each case, Virgo, it's about work, Pisces, it can be about home and emotion. And both of those could be pushing and provoking around the potential for change, whether those signs are up for it or not. Let's take a look at the event chart of when Uranus arrives exactly at that moment. Firstly, from a solar perspective, so in other words, from a zodiacal viewpoint, with the ascendant nominally on the vernal equinox, and that of course puts Uranus in the third house, so that's on the screen now, and it's in a conjunction with Venus. How ironic. Venus has just left Taurus, and they've been jostling recently in a conjunction, pushing us to shake up any relationship that's become a bit too staid. Perhaps our approach to resources has needed to be in some ways challenged. A very invigorating combination, but perhaps one that may have seen some relationships that weren't working so well perhaps come to a close. So Uranus combining with Venus suggests fluidity, and it suggests less structured alliances. Now, whether that's in the community, the third house, with siblings, the way families are, I feel a lot of this kind of way of being is out there already. It just could become more accelerated. So people could become perhaps more attracted towards transactional connections. But we also have Pluto in the mix. Pluto with a mutual receptivity to Uranus, because Uranus rules the sign of Aquarius. Now, Pluto can be about power, can be about leverage, but in Aquarius, the planet which is to do with the collective, us all, is pushing us really to try and get in touch with a higher and better version of ourselves. So I feel it's a very exciting combination between Pluto, Uranus and Venus, certainly asking us to value relationships where the ideology between us chimes, where we feel comfort. It's not about ownership, it's where we can actually have an accord based on philosophies. Talking of philosophies, the moon is in the free-spirited sign of Sagittarius. Very much about philosophies and our higher purpose. One of the downsides of Gemini is communication, and very fast, nimble, very amusing sometimes communication can mask emotion. So we are potentially going to see a detachment between people's emotion, the moon, and the way we connect to people, because the moon and Uranus are opposite. So that means we need more space. So people are going to want to move around more over the next 7 years. They may, in some ways, be less rooted, but I feel that also it pushes us to make sure that the relationships we are in are not just anchored in need, they are anchored in celebrating our individuality, but also, again, thinking about the way in which our ideas may mesh or not. Now, what about the ruler of the sign of Gemini? That's absolutely vital. Well, Mercury is in the sign of Leo, and fortune a broadly very positive trine with the moon. So that points towards warmth. It can be to do with enthusiasm, perhaps also to do with pursuing and thinking about the things that give us pleasure. And that can be our hobbies and interests. So maybe we're heading towards a part of human development where there will be much greater time created for people to focus on what they can be creative around, not just industrious around. So that's another little insight that I feel that we can gain. But what about Saturn and Neptune? They're of course in the sextile with Pluto, and now in a sextile with Uranus and Venus. Well, the great news about having Saturn in a sextile with Uranus, of course, another mutual receptivity. They both govern the sign of Aquarius. Saturn can be stabilised and it slows things down. I think in areas where it's in its full, it's not been great for our physical vitality, and we have seen some naked authoritarianism. And also we've seen a pushback on anything to do with people who are more vulnerable, Saturn conjunct Neptune. But I think that what Saturn can do is provide an anchor to Uranus and Venus. So once more, it's pushing us towards being aware of sincerity. So there's a lot to be hopeful here, but it is a chart which is very much to do with people's freedom and perhaps rights as individuals, and things that we may have thought were quite natural many years ago, where people would stay in one job or one relationship for the vast majority of their life, we're actually looking more towards things swiftly changing. That's just a reality of where things are. Now, some people could argue that because of the freedom-loving Uranus and the flexibility of Gemini, there could be a desire for a less centralized way of us living. But I think what we've seen with the DOG situation in the States is a lot of information has been garnered on people, and that big data is something, it is going to be a reality. So I feel that that might be a hope too far. But collective intelligences can emerge with Neptune in that sextile to Uranus. Things like telepathy, even astrology can become even more in vogue, where we get the instinct mixing with the science in a very, very exciting way. But if there are ideas that start to take shape, they could go round the world at such a rattling pace in a very revolutionary way, which again, it could feel unsettling, but it could be very, very exciting. But what about the natal chart from Placidus viewpoint, based on the prime meridian, Greenwich, universal time? Because I feel that we can all collectively relate to that too. And there, Uranus and Venus are in the 10th house. The 10th house can be how we connect to the wider world. It can be about our ambitions. It can be about our work. It can be about where we experience authority or where we experience tradition. So it suggests that tradition is going to continue to be challenged in a very, very powerful way. Now, Pluto, interestingly, here is in the 6th house of work. So we're going to see even more technology coming in. That's just a fact. And the big worry is the depopulation of people from jobs, which gives them life structure and purpose. And I think that is one of the worries about Uranus and Gemini, if I'm really honest. But Saturn and Neptune are in the 8th house. The 8th house can be about shared resources, but it can be about deep transformation. But if we look at the position of Mercury, the ruler of the sign of Gemini, it's in house 12. So that's a watery influence, very Piscean. We have Saturn and Neptune in the 8th house, even in the fire sign of Aries. 8th house, a very scorpionic energy. So then we have the moon in the fire sign of Sagittarius in the 4th house. What does all those influences have in common? Yes, they're fire located, but the fire is threaded through emotion, the water. So Mercury in the 12th house, deep thinking, understanding our subconscious, our patterns of behaviour in a more profound way. The moon in the 4th house, very much about stability and security. It's a great place for the moon to be, but in Sagittarius, it suggests that people could want to physically up sticks and move around a lot more, have much more fluid ways of being. So people can afford it, we'll do it. And then we have Saturn and Neptune in the 8th house. So whatever our expectation in terms of our connections to others, we could, if we resist understanding the psychological domain through our thinking, we could feel at times really closed in. So we have to go with this, even though it does seem a very mental process, very intellectual because of the air sign of Gemini. We have to feel into this. But essentially, I think what Uranus and Venus are saying is how we earn a living, how we connect to the world at large, and how we're going to evolve is just going to be a massive part of the mix. But how it feels to us is going to be an essential part of it too. Please stay with me as I go through each of the 12 zodiac signs now, from Aries through to Pisces. So Aries, if we go back to May 2018 for you, Mars, your ruler, clashing with Uranus suggests to me that some of the players in your life that you had then are no longer with you now. And one of the things that's come up time after time since then is where people's values don't align with yours. Yes, in a practical sense, there may have been choppy things around finances, ups and downs. You may have had some brilliant breakthroughs at times. Earlier this year, a combination of energy, because the solar eclipse in your sign in March was pushing you towards a new dawn, but Saturn in your 12th house was asking you to clear up some residual stuff. Saturn and Neptune now in your sign, forging a great link with Uranus, suggests that if you have got through most of that work, this does prime up an opportunity to think, but also interact differently around family emotional life, or you may be considering a new location even to live your life, which fits with the practical needs that you may have in your situation. You're definitely going to be looking to share your ideas a lot more. If you have been going through some painful stuff at times to do with those people or situations that have run their course, yes, there is still some work to do through September, October, November, December and January, because of Saturn being back in the 12th house. But overwhelmingly, if we take this event chart compared to what occurred in May 2018, which was very abrasive, very challenging, very impatient in some ways, maybe your idealism didn't quite match the realism of the circumstances you met at times. This time I think there's a much more nurturing environment for you to use the quick and changeable and innovative energies of Uranus in a way which is very healing to your long-term future. So Taurus, one of the archetypes of your sign is that you don't like change. How has it been with Uranus in your sign the last 7 years? Because if you've gone with it, particularly with Pluto in your 9th house for much of that time, you may now be a lot more informed, a lot more knowledgeable, a lot more travelled, a lot more conscious of what's important to you, the individual, than you were at the start of Uranus's journey through your sign. But there may have been some things that have gone, and some things that were part of your, if you like, structure of your world for quite some time, and that may not have been easy. What's wonderful about this new beginning is the role of Venus being so close to Uranus. I would say in terms of the big picture, that gives you a fantastic chance to start to make the most of all the talents and experiences and insights you've gained in recent years, but in a fresh new way, particularly with Pluto pushing you to transform your worldly interaction. So broadly for you, particularly with having Jupiter in the 3rd house of your chart in a very strong link with Mars in your 5th house, the more enterprising you are, the more you're going to benefit from Uranus being in the sign of Gemini. If you are someone who does really like to keep things very, very well structured, systematic, change isn't something you really welcome, you could find the world around you continues to change at such a speed of light that you will have no option but eventually to join in, which sounds a bit like a pressure, and I apologise, I don't mean to make it like that. I feel that the direction of travel for all of us is just going so fast. It is unsettling, but if you can just give yourself permission to be open to new ways of doing things, even what you eat and drink, but even the philosophies you have, the ideas you're thinking about, and work it also on just getting a stronger sense of your self-worth. That's going to be something that you're going to surprise yourself in a very positive way, I feel, over the next 7 years. There may be a more radical part of your nature that's set to come out, but it's one that will be ultimately very good for you. So Gemini, what a wonderful reception committee lays in wait for Uranus entering your sign. Not least Venus. Venus can be flirty in Gemini, but it also can inspire your love of anything to do with reading, communication, publishing potentially. Uranus connecting with Venus is going to amplify your natural magnetism and charisma. If you'd like to bring someone fresh into your world, whether it is in terms of people who share your interests through alliances and collaborations, or perhaps friendships, or in terms of a romantic involvement, the next 7 years look really exciting for you. But we also need to be conscious of what's been going on over the last 7 years, because if you're someone who's very open to healing, personal development, psychology, getting in touch with perhaps those deeper parts of our nature that are not so obvious, you may have worked with Uranus very well indeed. If you're someone who's much more cerebral, someone who likes to use your wits, but you're a little bit resistant to looking at the psychological side. You may have been buffeted by your nervous system being on edge, too much adrenaline at times, feeling it difficult to unwind or sleep, lots of headaches. All of those things may have been at play at times. Now, if you've worked with it, you may have worked through it, and I really hope you have, because that connection between Uranus and Venus is just stunning. And if there is something you have felt frustrated by over the last year, particularly of a creative nature, because you know, if you've watched videos or read articles about Jupiter in your sign, it was going to be that once in 12, 13 year golden opportunity to launch forwards with something that you had been working and worked very invested in. But unfortunately, Saturn in your sector of the world meant you encountered a lot of resistance. And I feel that the last year broadly has been quite challenging. What can happen now though is Jupiter has moved into your sector of everyday money, but your values. It's in a pretty close link with the Sun, but very importantly, a very energizing link with Mars. I feel that the ideas that you've been germinating over the last year can now start to ignite and really move forwards in a very, very exciting manner. And having Pluto in the 9th house of your chart, philosophies, connections with people overseas, different types of people. Maybe if you're someone who's trying to reach more people, you know, you're a so-called influencer, you're involved in publishing in some ways, you want to get your message out there, you're going to have a fantastic talent for doing it in a very profound way. Also, Saturn and Neptune suggest that there's going to be new people pitching up in your world who are going to be longer term players and in a very positive way. And all of that can feed into your sense of self, your personal confidence, your attractiveness, but also in terms of your earnings. So I think it's really positive for you. If you would like to encounter someone in a romantic context, there's a great chance you will over the next 7 years, as long as the need to be a free spirit isn't paramount. You know, if you're someone who at the end of the day you want the company but then you want your own space, that's a paradox you're going to have to continue to work on, particularly with the moon in your personal 7th house of this event chart. So yes, you can connect with people very well, but there may be times when the opportunities come up and you still decide that you'd rather be a free spirit. But you're going to have some choices, and choices are always empowering. So Cancer, if we think about the archetype of your sign, very much about security, stability, nurture. Over the last 7 years, Uranus has connected you to some exciting, interesting people. You may have changed your long-term plan, you may have liberated yourself from something that wasn't working and be working towards something that's been very engaging. One of the interesting things about the process of life is when we set targets, as we reach the highest point of the mountain and plant the flag on the summit, we realise that there's another mountain that we want to climb. There could be an element of that at the moment, but some of the friendships you had 7 years ago probably have made way. There's been a shake-up generally. It's been exciting. And as Uranus enters Gemini, there's a lot of energy being manifested in your sign by the Sun, but also the wonderful Jupiter. And they're linking to the energetic Mars. But for you, Mars is in house 3, which has an echo of Gemini. Mars here can be assertive, but also it has a desire to be more rugged and physically active. So as Uranus pitches up in a very tender psychological area after this very exciting phase of the last 7 years, you in the here and now may be wanting to take action or are taking action and are very much on the front foot. But what this event tells us in the conjunction between Uranus and Venus is the psychological dimension of all sorts of relationships is going to be amplified and magnified over the next 7 years. So there could be some involvements that are going to make way, but equally you could have a reconnection to someone from your past, and the way this comes about could be very, very surprising. Pluto, linking to Uranus and Venus, is in a very deep transforming part of your situation. So very psychological. You have Saturn and Neptune in the part of your chart to do with being influential, connecting to the world in a more authoritative way. But if you have been protecting your inner vulnerabilities by maintaining an implacable exterior, which Cancers can do, and sometimes being a little bit controlling, don't mean that as an unkind comment, it's possible with Venus and Uranus, as you begin this journey of Uranus in your 12th house, are going to help to open up a great deal more understanding of how you can work with some hurts that may be rattling around in the dark at the bottom of your being that you're not quite so conscious of. But if there is something you're not happy with at the present time, the fact that you've got a lot of action energy in your sign and with Mars in Virgo, and this 12th house energy, if you're in a relationship which is really not making you happy here and now, the chances are it will finish within the next 5 months. If you're in a relationship at the moment which seems okay, the chances are you're going to learn a lot more about your needs, the other person's needs, but also vulnerabilities over the next 7 years. If you're someone who's open to shine a light on the shadow side of your nature, some of those fears and anxieties, you'll be absolutely fine. If you resist it, that's when it could be a little more bumpy. So it's an intriguing set of influences for you. Uranus has certainly shook things up in a very exciting way the last 7 years. Now it's asking you to do some deeper work when everyone might think that Cancers have got it sorted because you're ruled by the moon. But as I say, if you're more in the material, physical world to protect yourself in terms of where you live, making sure those foundational parts of your life are good, which is obviously wise, but in some ways neglecting the more tender part of your nature, this is your chance to really, really grow. So Leo, over the last 7 years, the chances are that you've had an opportunity to do something completely different in the way that you've connected to the wider world. It may have been through a hobby or interest, it could have been professionally, it could have been through your own enterprise. But that stepping outside your comfort zone has probably proved to be rather exhilarating at times. Uranus moving into your 11th house is fantastic because it's an echo of its rulership of the sign of Aquarius. And it is about higher values, but it's also about friendships and the network. Venus there laying in wait provides a very good receptor. They're linking back to Pluto in your sector of relating. So new relationships can be heading your way over the next 7 years. And what you put in motion over the last 7 years can actually gain momentum. What's not to like? Well, you need to be mindful of the role of the Sun and Jupiter in your solar 12th house as Uranus arrives, because that can be very much to do with vulnerabilities. If you're a Leo who needs to maintain an implacable sense of being successful, you need to be admired at every moment, you're reluctant to open up and share any vulnerabilities, I feel it will prevent you from connecting in quite such a successful way. So in order to access the goodness of Uranus in the sign of Gemini for you, I feel if you can work on where you're fearful or where you feel judged or where you're judging yourself. Because if you remove those blockages or those hurts from the past, the opportunities are absolutely sensational for you over the next 7 years. So Virgo, over the last 7 years, Uranus has been moving through your sector of higher knowledge. Chances are you've learned an enormous amount from that transition. Now he moves right onto the cusp of your 10th house. That's our connection to the world, but it can also be to do with our work. Uranus in the 10th house can often like a degree of independence. Sometimes people with that natally work for themselves. It can also be offering services that are a bit different, but services is the word because you have a real appreciation for understanding what people's needs are and how to meet them. But Pluto, since 19th of November last year, for the third time, has been asking you to think about your present life structure, but be open to a transformation. If you've been resistant to that because you like knowing what your routine is, I do feel that over the next 7 years, things could change at such a pace. If you can get ahead of the change and anticipate where things are going, even if there's part of you that doesn't really want to shift, it will be a much easier passage for you. And what really assists you as Uranus makes his way into Gemini is that Mars is in your sign, forging a very dynamic link with Jupiter and the Sun in the part of your chart to do with collaborations. So if you seize the moment, you make the core decisions now rather than be passive and stick with purely what you know, that will be a much better thing for you. So I think, you know, it depends on what your work is or what you're wanting professionally or how it is for you in terms of your worldly connections. But don't sit on your hands. Anticipate change, but also seize the moment to demonstrate to people that you have some great ideas that can help to meet their needs. So Libra, Uranus moving into your 9th house is a bit of a paradox in a way, because the 9th house is very much about broadening horizons. Uranus doesn't like to wait. Obviously in the chatty Gemini, very vibrant and vivacious, linking with your ruler Venus, brilliant. If you want to learn a language, if you want to travel more, if you want to live overseas, if you want to be more flexible in your life, this looks really handsome. But because of the role of Saturn, particularly in Neptune, in your 7th house, if you do collaborate with people, it needs to be people that share the same philosophies, because if they don't, it's going to show up quickly, particularly with Mars in your 12th house. But talking of success with the Sun and Jupiter high in the sky, if you are someone who's very goal or work orientated, a connection to someone from your past may come back into your life in a very helpful way in the here and now. But I think that generally speaking, if you're someone who's spent quite a lot of your life being conscious of other people's needs, I think where you are now is you can set your boundaries more firmly, but also go for what you need in a much more dynamic way. And that could see your profile and your abilities reach a much wider audience in the years to come. Scorpio, over the last 7 years of Uranus moving through Taurus, there may have been times when you've had dazzling encounters, not always necessarily long lasting, but certainly very exciting. There may have been other times when you've needed personal space, even from people like loved ones, especially since Pluto has moved 3 times into Aquarius. Now, the interesting thing about relationships in general, as Uranus moves into the 8th house, that has a scorpionic vibe. It's very deep, it can be intense, but it also can be very passionate indeed because of the role of Venus. So in a purely relating sense, if there's someone you encounter, especially over these next 5 months, that you find very magnetic and almost irresistible, you could find yourself drawn compulsively into their arms. But do you know, the absolute converse can be true. You may find yourself wanting to separate from something that's no longer working. So it has to really feel right. And because as Uranus pitches up in house 8, the Sun and Jupiter are in your sector of freedom, and your traditional ruler is in the part of your chart to do with friendships, there may be someone who really creeps up on your senses over these next 5 months from your friendship group, and you may find them quite irresistible. But also we need to think about Uranus in the 8th house, particularly with Venus there, in terms of shared resources, investments and so forth. If you are interested in things like crypto, that interest could get red hot. But the thing with 8th house energy, it's always transforming. You understand this better than any other sign, but also you understand it is in some ways about devotion, but that can run all the way to obsession. So whereas over the last few years, there may have been some very exciting encounters in terms of relationships or your sex life, but also some endings, because of Uranus's need for space, or some new structures in an ongoing relationship, now things ramp up and amp up in quite a substantial way. And you could find that there are all sorts of cravings that start to manifest themselves, particularly over these next 5 months, but it could be over the next 7 years too. So Sagittarius, Uranus moving into your 7th house but connecting with Venus suggests a new dawn for all sorts of relationships. It doesn't mean to say that if you're in a relationship at the moment it's going to end, but it may reinvent itself. You may become much more conscious of how you exchange energy, not just with a personal partner, but with all sorts of people. Uranus over the last 7 years has been challenging, I think, in terms of maintaining routines. But if you're honest, do you like routines? You like the big picture, you like drama, you like things that are moving and evolving at pace. But Uranus has in some ways helped you to demonstrate huge amounts of invention and originality around your work. It's just that Saturn over the last couple of years has really been applying a very emotional dimension to your situation, which may have felt quite heavy going. But I think a lot of joyfulness can now start to spark. So whether you're connecting to people around shared interests or hobbies, or it is in a romantic context, you can look forward to some very exciting times ahead. The key with you is that you understand the principle of independence, which Uranus really gets too. So you can make that work for you. Uranus could see you connect in that alliance with Venus completely unexpectedly. It might not happen this week, it might not happen in this next 5 months, but it could happen in the next 7 years. And that connection could be one of the most significant connections you'll ever have. However, let's really be honest, if you are in a relationship which isn't working, Uranus being on the 7th house, being opposite the moon in your sign, is pushing you to be decisive about rediscovering that part of you that isn't just caught up in going through those daily life motions, which really Uranus and Saturn have been pushing you to engage with over the last couple of years. So it just depends on your unique circumstances, but generally a bright new beginning is here. Capricorn, Uranus over the last 7 years has really been potentially very exciting for you. You've probably done a lot of socializing and connecting with different types of people, but it's moving into a more practical area, which is to do with routines. And those routines can be to do with our work. It can be to do with things like the health choices we make, the type of food we eat and cook, the exercise we do. The 6th house is about virtue. The sign of Gemini is about information. You're going to become more informed. Venus is there, so you could collaborate with someone. If you wanted to start a new business providing a service, you will have it all together there, particularly as the Sun and Jupiter are in the part of your chart to do with relating and forging a very positive link to Mars in the part of your situation to do with taking risks, being more adventurous, getting on the front foot. So something's being shaken up here, and it may be that you are going to in some ways try to liberate yourself from some chores. That could be from using tech. It may be that you want some help in terms of your domestic load. You may be a little bit more wanting other people to pitch in and do their bit, particularly if you're the one who traditionally has done most of the heavy lifting. So there's innovation around all those things. But if you have been coming up with some brilliant ideas over the last 7 years, now you have a chance to try to make it all fit together and give you a practical return. So Aquarius, as I mentioned in my preamble, if you are an Aquarius with planets positions right at the start of Aquarius, the first 3 degrees, you really have the potential for a tremendous uplift from this movement of the progressive ruler of the sign of Aquarius into the 5th house, which is showcasing joyful talent and pleasure. It's about having fun. Venus is there as well. If you're single and you'd like to meet someone really dazzling and exciting could be heading in your direction. It might not happen in this first 5 months, but it certainly could. What I can assure you is that if you've got ideas and creativity that you want to reach a wider audience with, what a sublime opportunity you have. And the best way to go about it is to have passion, but also confidence and conviction in what you've got to offer. It doesn't mean to say it's all going to be about flair and invention. You can often be an original thinker, but that more Saturnian side of your nature is actually a very good thing, because you can mix form and function like no other zodiac sign. So you can be very modern and innovative, but also make sure the nuts and bolts work well too. And I feel this event chart is just perfect for so many Aquarius people to forge forwards in the most exciting and thrilling ways. And the world is going to be so much more receptive over the next 7 years than you've ever experienced before. So Pisces, over the next 7 years, there's going to be a lot of action around where you live. You may move, you may not. If you don't, there could be just changes within your home. You may have created more space. Uranus loves space. You may declutter in a way you would never have thought you could have done. You may go from the ultimate hoarder to the ultimate minimalist. You may decide to share some space, particularly with Venus in the mix. If you have got a spare room, you may rent it out. If you're someone who's seen the kids fly the nest, you may downsize to somewhere smaller. So there's changes going to be coming, but it doesn't mean to say they're going to be bad changes. I feel Uranus in the 4th house can bring about some challenges emotionally, but over the last 7 years, Uranus has been in your 3rd house and has given you a lot of opportunities to absorb new information and knowledge. If you work or are attached to technology in any way, you may be very, very gifted, and it's possible you could start a new venture from the comfort of your home or provide a service in your local community. You may even go into business with a family member. If you're already in business with a family member, you may want to separate from that family member. So things are going to be quite changeable potentially around where you live and around your closest connections, but it doesn't have to be bad. And one of the reasons for that is your chart is so supported by Jupiter, your traditional ruler, as Uranus arrives. Jupiter's linking with the Sun, adding vibrancy and warmth, and the link to Mars of both of them is helping you to set your boundaries. So I think on the whole, you're going to be surprising yourself how you will evolve around your emotional perceptions and connections to others. If you're someone who's always spent time with others, you may actually start enjoy living on your own. If you're someone who's been a lifetime solo person, suddenly you could surprise others by getting together with someone else. So there's a lot of change, a lot of texture, a lot of excitement, but it won't be dull.